Let's talk about the Great Void. One day, Team Fortress 2 is going to die. I'm going to repeat that. One day, the game that you know and love, in which you had hours of fun, is going to be dead. Valve will stop updating it, there will be no more players left to play it, and it will fade into obscurity. This is an absolute guarantee. That day is not today. We've now waited the longest amount of time since the last major update in the history of TF2. Depending on how you look at it, it could either be a bit over a year or almost 2 years. Does this mean that the game is now dead or in the process of dying? No, not by a long shot. Let me elaborate. TF2 is on a decline. It will never go back to how popular it used to be. It still holds a large amount of players, and sometimes there's an increase in them too, but overall, the amount of them is steadily decreasing. I don't think that any update, not even a competitive update, could ever raise this game's popularity for an extended period of time. For a few months, yes, but then people will move on again. And that's normal and okay. Yes, it's depressing, but that's just how things are. We have to acknowledge this and not tell ourselves that everything's still the same way it used to be. However, this does not mean that the game has ended quite yet. In fact, I truly believe it still has a very long way to go from here. I'd like to take you on a journey down TF2's timeline from here until its end. Obviously, I can't truly predict the future, and I also can't tell exactly when these things will happen, so do try to think about this for yourself. This is just how I believe the game's future will take place. This will not necessarily be an uplifting timeline. In fact, you'll hear many things you may not want to hear. But I think that it's very important to talk about these things, to get an understanding of what could potentially happen and to prepare for them, if only mentally. So let's begin with not a single incident, but rather with a progress. I'm talking about updates for the game getting less and less frequent, but not due to development taking longer because of all the content, but rather because of lack of interests and more developers moving on to other projects. During this progress, we'll still see updates, but less new additions and more tweaks and small patches. Merely maintenance to keep the game alive and working, not necessarily new content to keep it fresh and exciting. Until eventually, they only do the absolute minimum. Players will also take notice of this and keep leaving the game as it is happening, because it's not interesting them anymore. We may or may not be already in this progress. I believe the TF team is still working on something, very diligently even, but it's also possible that it won't be much longer till they burn out and move on to more interesting games. That is understandable and inevitable. And then, we'll reach the worst of the worst. The day that the TF team decides to entirely stop working on TF2. No more updates, no more small patches, not even any community content. This will be the catalyst for things to come. Why will they do it? Maybe they burned out, or maybe they decided to call it quits. Maybe they'll go out with a celebratory bang, or they'll simply let it fizzle out. Either way, this will be the moment that the game will not be officially supported anymore. Goodbye and thanks for all the fish. Afterwards, it all goes downhill. Almost immediately upon hearing these news, the majority of players will leave the game. Mostly out of disappointment, and because they don't feel like investing time in a game that's now confirmed to never be updated anymore is worth it. At the same time, content creators like artists and especially YouTubers will move on to other games. There won't be any more content for them to discuss, so they'll keep searching for something else. YouTubers that don't rely on new things to talk about might stay, but after their fans lose interest, they'll be forced to move on as well. Many workshop creators will also stop creating new items in the game, since they won't be added anymore and there's no monetary gain or even incentive to keep going. Eventually, the official Valve servers and even the item servers will be shut down. This might not be necessary for Valve to do for an incredibly long time, since it doesn't cost them much money and they won't go bankrupt anytime soon. However, I can imagine that it will happen one day, and it will be a main reason for many players, especially traders, to leave. More and more people will leave, and the flame that once shined brightly will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then we'll have reached the end, right? But you know how they say, the flame that burns twice as bright only burns half as long? If that is true, then doesn't the opposite apply too? Because in that darkness, that great void, there is still a lonely flame. And that flame lingers. No, it burns. A small group of dedicated players that love the core game, they will stay with it. Those are the people who grew up on the game, who've been playing it for as long as they can remember. The same people that still play the game despite it being barely updated in years. Ones who withstood that endurance test and are still there. And the same goes for modders, map and item makers who will still release content for free online. Those people don't care for new things or benefits. They love the game for what it is and they want to enjoy it. Because there are two very important reasons that will keep that lonely flame burning. Two things that will keep the game alive even after its creators let it go. The first of those is community servers and how easy it is to set them up. Valve launched this game with not their own servers but ones hosted by players, and that's also how it will spend its last moments. Many of the good servers are dead nowadays, with only gimmicky ones surviving like custom game modes and trade and idle servers. But in the future, when Valve servers get shut down, community servers is where you'll spend your time. Because here's the thing, the servers don't dictate the players, it's the other way around. The real reason why only those custom servers survived is because it's simply more practical to use Valve's matchmaking to get the vanilla TF2 experience. Anything else Valve didn't deliver, however, so the community did it for them. But once you can't have that vanilla experience anymore, then the community will deliver again and replace those gimmicky servers. The second big reason for this game's survival is modding and customizability. Like player-hosted servers, modding was always a very big part of games when TF2 first launched. In fact, many of Valve's titles are simply mods, like Counter-Strike, Dota and the Team Fortress series itself. Valve never shut down fan projects or mods, unless they were just straight copies that didn't add anything original. But take a look at TF2 Classic. A whole separate experience created by fans that wanted to take the game in a different direction. And it's very competently made. I repeat, fans made their own version of the game whose quality rivals that of the original. And even in TF2 we can see great examples of modding. Saxton Hale, Freak Fortress, Slender Fortress, Randomizer, TF2 x 10, Zombie Fortress, and those are just a few. Fans came up with them and they remain popular. I mean, the reason why games like Doom, Quake and Half-Life are still popular is also due to how easy they are to mod. Allegedly, Valve are aiming to make Team Fortress Classic open source, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they did the same to TF2 one day. Because then, people will create entirely new experiences. Like a single-player TF2, or using the game's mechanics for a completely different gameplay, like Dota did with Warcraft. Both of these things give the community a lot of power, and Valve always recognized the importance of them. They're not like Nintendo. They love community involvement and even hire community members directly, like they did with TF2 as well. They know that, as a creator, you can only offer things, but the players decide what to do with them. Actually, there's a third big reason for keeping the game alive. The very same thing that Doom, Quake and Half-Life all have in common. The game works. It's not imbalanced and Valve never ruined the core experience over the years. This is also due to how scarce updates became, because while they didn't update anything, they also didn't break anything at the same time. But the gameplay is solid, the classes are excellent, the maps are varied and the graphics timeless, and it's overall just fun. It has its flaws, of course, but it's not unplayable. I keep saying this, but there just isn't another game like this one. All of those things are what fuels that flame, and why it won't burn out for a really long time. While I don't think that it's the future of TF2, one also can't forget the competitive side of TF2. It was built from the ground up by the fans. They came up with their own rules and restrictions completely isolated from Valve. And it still exists to this day, with self-funded tournaments that get hosted regularly. I have to say that it probably has some of the most dedicated and passionate players in it. And the same goes for all the charity events like Tip of the Hats, or contests like Memes vs Machines. If that doesn't prove what this game can be without Valve's support, then I don't know what can. So in the end, a very small group of very dedicated players will persist, and a very close community will form. It won't be as diverse as it is now, full of veteran players and not many new ones. It may be exclusive and somewhat toxic and uninviting towards newcomers, or it may be very open and friendly towards everyone. Likely, it will be a mix of both, depending on which server you connect to. If you ask me, I hope that it's the latter though. New players will join now and then, some will only stop for a bit to warm themselves by the bonfire, while others will sit down and rest. but everyone will add something to the flame to ensure that it doesn't go out. Let's be real here for a bit. Look, I don't always know what I'm talking about. This thing you see here, this face, that's just a persona I put on. Behind it I'm very similar, but I'm still just a human. I've been wanting to make this video for a very long time now, and I don't know why I didn't. To tell you the truth, I think I'm a little scared. I don't truly know what the future will bring. Maybe I just made this video to convince myself that maybe things won't be so bad. I do believe everything in this video with all my heart, but there's still a little doubt. I know that some people will say, oh, look at Peter over here whining like it's the end of the world. Yes, if this game does in fact die, it will be the end of my world, at least in a way. I've had the most fun in this game, met my bestest friends through it, and I even got inspired to make my own content because of it. There's a reason I have over 3,000 hours in the game, because it genuinely is such a big part of my life. People can get married in games, mourn the death of their friends, and even say goodbye to the game with a big hurrah, so the importance of such games shouldn't be underestimated. I'm not alone in this, and I know that. I'm sure that there's a certain someone watching this video right now who feels what I feel. TF2 has been with me for so long, and I don't know what I could do without it. I keep repeating it in my videos, but there just isn't any game like this one. I don't think that anything could ever really replace it if it went away. I'm sorry that this video ends on such a downer after I've been pretty much hyping the future up so much throughout the video. Do I think that this is how it's all gonna go down? Yes, and I think you can believe me. But it is also pure speculation and estimation. I've only experienced the death of one game so far, and even then I wasn't present until the end. But for this one, I'm almost certain. I think. I don't know.